So welcome to a new episode of Mediators Talk. It's my pleasure, and I'm excited to introduce to you Jay Berman. He's a legend already. He was called the superstar of mediation. I'm very privileged to know him, very little, but the more I learned about him preparing for this interview, the more I'm amazed. This year marks his 27th year of professional career as a mediator. That's impressive.
The gray hairs support it.
No, but what's more impressive is 2,600 cases, and a lot of them, they're high profile cases. That is almost unheard of. How do you survive?
One case to the next. I mean, my favorite part is that every case is different and the people are different. And what's going on, the dynamics are all different. So to me, I love every one on its own.
I think your passion is what keeps you going. That's one thing that kind of, made me want to talk to you at this gathering at Beverly Hills Bar Association. And I can see going everywhere, like on everything they read about you, people, this is what they say. You're tremendously passionate about it.
I am. And so are you. That's why you're doing this series. And I think it's fantastic because
thank you.
It's a contagious thing.
It is. And you are one of the very few who are very openly supporting educating the public for mediation. And I think we still don't have enough. And I want to thank you for that. And thank you for being here. And I also want to add that you are one of the 7 in California and 20 in US mediators who are called Masters Mediator by the American Association of the American Arbitration Association, which is quite a high standard. And you also have been a distinguished neutral of the year 2017, named by the National Academy of Distinguished Neutrals. Right.
I've been very fortunate that people have enjoyed and recognized the work. I mean, these things, to be in any field and to be given an award like that is just amazing. It's really flattering.
Well worth it and well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I want to talk about the passion. I think we should start there. But, when we first talked about doing this, I listened to Brené Brown, and she was interviewing Barack Obama, and they were talking about leadership. And what struck me in that interview was that one of the characteristics that she's seeing in big and very important leaders is to be able to keep two opposite concepts in the mind and work with those and not be afraid to discard or to be, inclined to prefer one over the other. And I was like, that's exactly what a mediator does, right?
It's really true. It's maybe the most important thing a good mediator does. I think it's our human nature to hear two arguments and decide who we think is telling the truth or which is the right argument. We turn on the television and there's a game playing and we root for one of the sports teams or something. We're very good at picking a side, picking an argument, picking a political party or candidate or something, and then advocating for that one against the other. But mediators have to actually go against that grain and do the opposite. That's very hard to learn. One of the cases I did early on, I was maybe 18 months in as a mediator, and it was a sexual harassment case in a dental office. The two stories were completely night and day. She said, I'm a single mom, and he said, if I don't sleep with him, I'd lose my job, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. And he said, are you kidding me? Like, we had an arrangement and it was a side deal, and she knows that, and and so on. I don't want to get into their business too much. But at the end of the day, we reached an agreement. He actually signed a settlement agreement and wrote the check and slid it across the table to her. And she signed the agreement and put the check in her wallet. And the two of them stood and shook hands. And while the lawyers and I were writing up the agreement, they were sitting in the back of the room and he's showing her pictures of his kids and all of that. It had gone from anger and shutdown when they walked in the room to a place where they were back to being how I assumed they were while they worked together the whole time, the better part of that. And I got home that night, and my girlfriend at the time asked me, so who do you think was telling the truth? And I just smiled because, and I said to her, you know what? I may have a future in this business yet, because that was the first time all day I had considered that question, truly. So to be able to spend that day, 8.5, 9 hours, I think it was, with these people and help them reach an agreement and help them restore the relationship that they'd had and have a binding legal settlement agreement drawn and everything, and never try to decide who I thought was telling the truth and who wasn't, that wasn't my job. That's not what they hired me for. They hired me to help them get there. And I think that's the hardest thing about being a mediator, is taking all of that and setting it aside and actually trying to be neutral or impartial. And you and I have talked about this before. I've got a different take on that, but we have to not decide. We have to hold two separate truths and respect each for what they mean to the people who are telling us that side of the story. And that's really, it goes against the grain of human nature to do that.
It goes, but it's so useful. I feel that's how we move forward. Because if we're stuck in a story, we're always gonna, even justice, right? Like, this was, for me, I shared this with you also before. I came from film school into law school, and I was like, oh, it's justice, but they forgot it's justice for peace. How do we achieve peace? That's kind of the part that we left aside. And in litigation, there's always war. And when you come with this approach that you're talking about, right, we're making peace, although maybe it looks like, but it is justice too.
I think the biggest thing about it is just the construction of the event of the mediation process. So to start with, it's a real timeout in the litigation process. It just sort of says that whole thing you're doing where you're fighting against each other to win, that's out there. Here for today's purposes, we have a different goal. And I like to tell people at the outset of the day, everybody came here today looking for something. And if you look across the table or now on the Zoom windows or however it is, it's the people you're looking at who have what you came here for today. And so to the extent that people keep that in mind and that they haven't empowered us like they would an arbitrator or a judge to decide that and to forcibly take what somebody is and give it to somebody else, because we don't have that power, for them to get what they came there to get, they have to get it from the other people. So I like to tell people it's not a process of winning over somebody else. It's a process of winning them over, because they have to give you what you came there for. And it's a whole different dynamic. And I think when you explain that to them and the paradigm shifts, then we can have a different kind of a conversation. And that I like to start the day off that way.
I read quite a bit about you from what you sent me and what I could find. And I think everybody's saying that you have this quality that's special, that you can bring people together. It doesn't matter if they're like high level, lower level, from different cultural backgrounds, you can cross those boundaries. And one thing that I love that you said in an interview is that people don't change their minds, but with new information, they might make a new decision on an old issue. I love that.
It gives people the ability to take a different position when they've heard new things. And they can say, well, I didn't know that before. Now that I know that, I'd be willing to pay more or accept less or do something different for them. But absent that new information, you're asking them just to step back from their original position and compromise. And I don't know about the last time you compromised, but to me, when I compromise, I feel like I walk away with less than half. I mean, it doesn't feel like a good experience to me. And I think part of what's happening in mediation right now that I think hurts us is that people walk in the door and one person says, I want $100,000, and the other says, I'll give you 5,000. And they come to some compromise and everybody walks away, as a lot of folks who do what you and I do for a living like to say, everybody walks away equally unhappy, and they call that a good settlement. I don't. I think we've got to add value to that process as mediators. We have to be creative. We have to ask questions and learn what people are really interested in. So that's why it doesn't matter to me what culture somebody is from, or what their status is in our socioeconomic space or whatever. It matters to me what they want and how I can help them creatively get to that point and get the people in the other room to find a reason to agree to it. But it has to make sense for everybody. And I think that's what makes it better. But it's also the harder part of mediation. I think anybody can say, okay, fine, I'll take 90. Well, I'll pay you 10. Well, I'll take 80. We can do that all day. And you don't need a really informed person to carry numbers alone back and forth like that. But to understand what's motivating and driving people. I had a guy one time in a mediation who, it was a personal injury case of some sort, I think, if I remember right, but he said, I want $435,710. And I said, that's a really specific number. Help me understand more about that number, what it means to you. He said, that's how much is left on my house. And because I'm never going to be able to work again, if there's one thing I need to know, it's that nobody's ever going to come and take my house away from me. And I went in the other room and the insurance company said, that's interesting. Find out if his mortgage is assumable. And now we're having a whole different discussion because the insurance company is going, we could pay this claim out over 30 years, perhaps at a lower interest rate than we could fund it at. And maybe we can do that and give this man his house. And so there were, and then, you take that down to present dollars and all that, it's much less than 435. So it's an interesting way of solving problems when you understand what about it is so important to people.
One of the reasons we chose the title for today's meeting, Mediation Creative Solutions, is because you're a master at finding creative solutions. And everybody talks about this. And every interview, every witness that I read out there, they're like, he's the man. We're going to get the toughest cases to Lee J, and basically he's going to solve it. And another thing that I found very interesting and funny is that you would go until 3 a.m. to do so. It's not only passion, but it's this drive that a lot of people fear you. It's one of the colleagues in one of the articles, the wife of this partner that you have said, "Oh no, not meditating with Lee J again."
She said, "I'll see you in the morning," to her husband, the lawyer who is coming to the mediation. Yeah, he jokes with his wife that she knows not to expect him before dawn because he brings me some really, really challenging cases. It's kind of fun. His cases, he represents title companies a lot. And so his cases are neighbor disputes. And so, we can talk about an encroachment and, whether this neighbor has the right to build a second story on their house that blocks the view of that neighbor. But we've gotten to the point where they're not talking to each other when they walk in the room. And a few hours in, we're sitting around somebody's living room table and talking about, well, what if we pull the bedroom back about 4 feet this way? And we're redesigning the house, and they're willing to do it to work with the neighbors, because part of what makes, as an outsider coming in, part of what I think we're supposed to bring is a different perspective. And I said, y'all have lived here 10 years, right? And how old are your kids? And how much longer do you think you'll live here in this house? And they said, another 10, 12 years at least till our kids are out of school. And the other people had just bought, and they had small children, and they were going to live there another 10 or 15 years. I said, so let me make sure I understand this right. You're both going to be here 10 years, maybe 15, living next door to each other. How do you want that to go every day of your lives for the next 10 or 15 years? And they kind of looked at each other and looked at me and said, you're right. We need to do this differently. And I just ask a lot of questions. What would make this different? What could we do that would make everybody happy? And then we start looking at different kinds of solutions than the right, wrong, can we, can't we, what does the code say? What does the law say? What does the zoning say? You can look to things like that to be right or wrong and sort of binary, yes or no, but that's not going to help them live together for the next 10 or 15 years with just a fence between them. and looking down on each other's yards and families and everything. The kids should be playing together and not hating each other.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I wonder, where is your talent coming from? Can you trace it to a point in time or something back in time?
I can't pinpoint it, but I can tell you it's a mindset. What I've learned is I really enjoy helping people see something that they've been living with for a while in a way that's different, helping them see it through different lenses and different perspectives and coming at it from different directions, and just helping them have a different perspective on it, because that's how I think you start solving problems. I think it was Einstein who said you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that got you into it.
Exactly.
And I think if you can help people see things in a different way, they can have this aha moment, and that changes everything. It changes their feelings about the discussion, their feelings about the other people, and it opens up a whole wealth of creative possibilities that is just different than a compromise, a yes or a no.
I think the world needs mediation, and I would like to have another story if you want to share then in terms of how can we shift perspectives of our leaders, and maybe an executive. You do executive coaching,
Yes.
from what I know. And can we actually change some leaders' perspective and mind and get them, because we're living in this very polarized moment, and on all levels,
Yeah.
like politically and socially. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's your experience with the executive coaching? And
So I agree with you. I think that in every police and sheriff's agency in every small town up to our national level with the politics and how they're involved in all of these situations, I think we're living in a time that's as polarized, I think, as maybe the late 60s with the civil rights movement and so on. And I think it's just as important and just as dire right now. So the work that I do, I get called in a lot with top leadership teams. And the easiest example that I can think of is you've got a company who has a leadership team of 5 or 6 senior vice presidents, perhaps, or division presidents or something, but who each sort of sit atop of their silo doing what they do as a part of that business. And what I tell the CEO is, you've got to get them to walk into the room and take off their hat that says, I'm in charge of the manufacturing department and I'm in charge of the distribution department, and instead put on the hat that all says the same thing. We are the leadership team running this whole company. And so they're not advocating for resources or what's best for their department. They're trying to think, using all their intellect and their knowledge about the company. They're trying to help guide the company as a whole for the betterment of the company, and not just to get more resources than the other department head for their department. So once they start thinking together instead of against each other, and they sort of come around the same side of the table, like the book Getting to Yes that came out of the Harvard program 30 years ago. Once they change that thinking, then they're working together to solve a problem. And I try to do the same thing in mediations. And frankly, it's like the real good old days in politics, where you had somebody like Teddy Kennedy reaching across the aisle to somebody on the other side and coming up with these joint task forces of Republicans and Democrats working together, where 8 or 10 of them go into a room and solve a problem, not with the red hat or the blue hat on, but with the red, white, and blue hat on, saying, we're here trying to do something better for the country. You have some interests, we have some interests. Let's sort this out together. And if it works out in a way that's more of a win-win than a compromise, because they really listen to each other and they understand what the different constituencies need from this and why they're fighting for it the way they are, then I think we can do some joint problem solving. But as long as everybody's taking their money and their direction from the political parties that tell them what to do and what to say, and they're afraid to deviate from that, that's where we're really in trouble. So I just think we need to all change hats.
it's a very interesting kind of thing to experience and witness, because as an immigrant, right, I came from Romania. there are many reasons why I've done the crossover, but one of the reasons was that we were looking at the Americans, that they're always solving problems.
Mhm.
They were always together, they were
Yes.
the division. We always felt like it's us that we're not together. They're like, oh my God, Americans are always united, and they won the war. That's a Romanian thing. We're like, we wanted to be with the Americans, and now finally we were. But it's true, right? It's that image that we had very clear, that America is always standing together. And then I came in 2000s, and everything was like completely shifted. And it's strange because I'm like, wow, what happened to us?
And 2000 was a year. I mean, if you remember, that was the
Oh, yeah.
the Bush versus Gore, where the Supreme Court decided our presidency, and we were arguing over hanging chads and not acting in our best behavior as the votes were being counted and everything else. That was, I think, the start of this real landslide into where we are right now. I did some work 2 summers ago now in Uzbekistan, and they had been part of the Soviet bloc. Now they're on their own. They're very proud people with a very mixed heritage. They come from Bedouin, Muslim, Arab sort of influence. And then they have this Russian overlay for all the years that they were, part of the USSR. Now they're trying to open up to the West and have European and American influences. And they're like, oh, you're from America. You all are, you have it all together. And I'm thinking, not quite. But I think, you look at our country, we're so young, relatively speaking. Not like Uzbekistan, that's 28 years old when I was there, but still at a couple of 100 years old, 250, we're still younger than most of the nations out there. And I think we banded together and we won our independence. And, like a lot of countries after a revolution like that, we're all for one and one for all, even though the writing of our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence and all of that was very hard fought and had very different agendas going on. And we've been through slavery and everything else as a country. But now we're I don't want to say that we're on top, but we're at a position where socioeconomically in the world, we're in a tremendous place, and we're very fortunate. We have everything we could ask for. And I think that has made us turn inward and fight with each other for power and control and greed and all those sorts of things. And we're no longer saying and, we're saying or. We're not saying let's all get together and do this and this and this. We're saying let's do that. No, let's do this. And we're fighting over where to put those resources and what direction to go. I think it's unfortunate that we've lost the ability to say we and us and let's and together. We're saying you and I and you're wrong and so on. And I think mediation skills teach us those things. I wish they were teaching it in 3rd grade.
Well, everywhere, but also the leaders. I'm going back to my first quote of Brené Brown, because, good leaders, I think they're great mediators. They're able to integrate. I was writing the other day, as a filmmaker, I love open-ending stories. If you cannot have a fixed story, right? Fixed narratives makes exactly what you're saying, separating people and putting them, oh, you're there, I'm here. We're in different stories, and we need to have this one story together. So my question to you is, can mediation save the world, and how?
Yes, it can. Quite seriously, yes, it can. And one great example is Doug Knoll's book. And I can see the cover, and I've just forgotten the title. He speaks of, he takes a bunch of different international disputes, international strife, and he points in each where the leaders appointed a diplomat or somebody politically connected who didn't ever have mediation training or peacemaking skills, but put them in the middle to conduct diplomacy using their name and their title, or the US of A behind them or something like that, and failed miserably. And then he takes each one of them and breaks it down into, if a trained mediator had been inserted into this conflict, no mediator would have ever done that. We instead would have done this, and this is how it may have come out differently than the disaster that came out of it. I think that our government and our diplomacy forces, and probably the UN and others need to be thinking about putting mediators in those positions and stepping the politicians back from that conflict and letting the mediators go in to fix it, because it's what we do. I mean, 27 years, that's all I've been doing. And so are all the colleagues who stand to my left and right. And no one's asking or letting folks like us have a seat at the table. They'd rather have somebody who's who's
all-timer.
And who's related to, generations of senators or something. It's unfortunate.
I've seen politicians in Romania and, Uzbekistan and all the examples. Like I think what's behind that, it's really, we're not, in terms of emotional intelligence, with all due respect, we're coming out of like what I call 30 years behind what we're here. And it's very different. Like the mentality is different. Like we need to kind of learn how to respect everyone and talk on their same language. But we need to kind of understand, like, the old countries are like very much in the same you're saying now that's happening here. But I've seen this again and again in Romania, when only politicians are dealing with this and nobody else is able. It's very surprising to come to America, what I thought is 30 years ahead of us in my youth, and to realize that actually we're stuck. It's almost like the old structures are not yet adapted to what's happening to all of us, because the young generations are, people in their 20s and 30s, I think they're natural mediators. I taught a lot. I taught inner city kids for a decade, and they're finding their own solutions. They're actually very smart. I have a lot of faith in them. It's just almost us, not you and me, we're trying our best, but we're kind of part of it too. Like we're not pushing this fast enough and hard enough. I wonder
a couple of things I think that make that true. One is you're pointing to, I think, the difference between IQ and EQ, right? We look at it in the workplace. We should be looking at it more in national politics and policy setting and all of that sort of thing. Intellect is wonderful, and it really helps as an aid. And it offers us data to start to make decisions on, but it doesn't stop there. The EQ is what helps us get other people to agree with our point of view, or see it differently, or see what about our point of view they can relate to, or what speaks to them about it. And to me, generationally, I think you're absolutely right. I was playing in the pool with a bunch of my nieces and nephews years ago, and I was the only adult in the pool. So they all looked at me like, make up a game. And we had a Frisbee and a ball and a floaty styrofoam thingy. And so we like piled them up and took the Frisbee and we counted like who could knock the thing off so many times. And I built a game that was competition, because I grew up where games were competition and you played to see who could win. And everybody tried their hardest and, all of that. And they kind of played along half-heartedly, almost humoring me, I thought. And then I got out of the pool to go make the hamburgers and things. And I look back 5 minutes later, they're all holding hands and running in the shallow end in a circle as fast as they can, trying to make a whirlpool. Wow. And I'm like, I'm the mediator. These guys are working together toward a common cause, and I'm the one who invented the competitive game. And so one of the things I've learned is that this generation, they're growing up at a time where society is being forced to be more communal. And I don't mean forced by politics. I mean forced because our pandemics and our fracking pollution and all of those things don't stop at borders. We're living at a time where we have international problems and we're having to work together to solve them. And so this generation is growing up at a time where you have to work together. You can't say, well, we're going to blow out like the video of the leaf blower gardener who blows all the leaves onto the neighbor's yard. And the next day, the other gardener comes and blows them all back on the first. We can't have that individualized, independent thinking anymore, because the world is simply more communal than it was 50 years ago when our parents were kids. And so I think that's shaping them to think together more and to think about collective problem solving and owning problems collectively instead of pointing fingers. So I think that points to a brighter future. And it
Yes.
points to more of the kind of conflict resolution and the interest-based solutions, you and I would call it, that we're talking about. I think they're a more fertile soil to build that kind of a future in than, let's say, the baby boomers were, because they won the war, right? They had a different mindset and made up their minds and stuck to their guns. And I think this generation's starting to say, hey, we have a problem and we're tired of all this arguing and rhetoric. Let's just figure out how to work together and solve it. And good for them.
Yeah, I agree. I see that strongly, and I think it's beautiful. I think also competition is nothing wrong with it. I'm a former competitor figure skater, and I remember those days. And recently, I just, for years, I was like, I don't want to compete. This is so boring. But I just learned to shoot a bow and arrow, and that came back into it. But I was like, okay, so wait, there is that drive, right? And a lot of business people told me, like, but how you cannot be competitive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to win. You have to make your. But I think once we distinguish between what is truly valuable and what we call value, and I think this pandemic, right, made such a big difference. Like, where is your family? What are your connections? Instead of how much did you accumulate in your house that now you're supposed to be by yourself, right? And I would love to see that talk at one point, but we're talking about mediation.
Well, so I've done a lot of work with some of the top consulting firms, and including McKinsey and Company. And one of the things that they like to say is that steel sharpens steel. You give me feedback, I give you feedback, we all get better. And it's kind of a competitive environment, but not in the way of who wins. It really is, give me the tough feedback, help me get better, pound me into a sharper sword.
Exactly.
And there's something to be said about that. I mean, competition does bring out the best in us. There's no question that if I'm running 100 yards, well, when I was younger and more athletic, if I was running 100 yards, I was going to run it much faster if there are people on both sides of me pushing me. And I think that a lot of businesses run on that kind of adrenaline, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, as long as we don't forget that it's not me versus John versus Sally. It's all three of us trying to break sales records for the company or whatever it is. So competition can be very, very healthy and very good in a lot of scenarios. It's just not necessarily the best way to solve problems in a way that lasts. And, so look at our biggest competition we have is our presidential election, right? It's the one that most Americans watch and pay attention to and are involved in. And if you look at the way we have gone from Democrat to Republican to Democrat to Republican, back and forth over the last 24 years, it just shows that we're doing binary either or. And one gets in office and tears down all the photos and the plaques that went to the last one and puts all theirs up. And then the next one comes in and tears those off. It's this, now it's our turn, and we're gonna move the needle as far this way as we can until those guys take office, and then they're gonna move. It's unfortunate that they're not seeing themselves as leaders of the whole nation. They're seeing themselves as leaders of one side or the other and advancing their agenda for their cause. And at the end of the day, that hurts all of us, and it wastes resources. It's just kind of ridiculous the way they fight with each other. I think we can do better.
I wish you could do better to go out there and teach something and contribute to the best of your ability, because we need you.
We are, right? That's what we're doing right here, right now. People are going to watch this and they're going to get on board and they're going to say, how can we do our part?
I would love to have that impact together, because we're talking about together. I'm doing my little part. And
Carina, we will. We will.
I'm pretty sure. Usually I end these discussions because I would love to listen to your stories forever. Like, I hope you're going to come back to us and keep the ball rolling.
My pleasure.
Because we need this. I think everybody needs to know the work you're doing, the work the mediators are doing. And that's why I call it Mediators Talk. It's a double joke, because we never talk. So We listen. Our strength is listening. However, I know most of mediators are amazing storytellers like you are. And thank you for sharing that.
It's my pleasure.
So to end in a fun way, I would say final word for mediation is
Peacemaking.
peacemaking. Conflict would be in one word.
Unfortunate.
Unfortunate. How do you define flow?
The energy of the universe.
That's true. So
We'll hyphenate that. It's a one word.
Yeah, it's the natural state. So one thing that you keep doing in mediation you would like not to do, or if you have one lesson that you learned the hard way and you can share with us.
So I can give you two. The one thing I keep doing that I need to stop doing is I moved to the West Coast when I was about 12 from New York, and out here everybody said you guys when they meant people, plural, and that no longer works in our society. I mean, it leaves people out and it's wrong, and I keep doing it. And my mother's from the South. She still says y'all. I grew up saying y'all. I'm trying to remember that that's a better way to address people. But the thing that I keep trying to learn, I think the thing I need to learn to be better still is to listen even harder. I have a creative mind, as you've alluded to, and I have all these ideas like a popcorn machine. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I think that's where it really comes from. And I need to keep listening and not rush to solutions as fast as I do, because the longer you listen, the wider the opportunity for creative resolutions. And we can cut that off if we jump in too soon with, I have an idea, right? So I've got to just keep pulling the horses back and slowing it down and listening more intently.
Deep listening coming from you is wow. It's an amazing lesson we all have to learn, but it's amazing to see that you want to go deeper even. It's quite remarkable. And just to end, the best feeling that you have at the end of a mediation, what do you?
So I mediated a case one time that presented itself as a music royalty dispute over a flow of royalties coming from songwriting. And what it really was a broken family that hadn't recognized this other stepdaughter of the songwriter. And at the end of it, literally the mom and two daughters and this estranged stepdaughter all hugged in one big group, and they were all sobbing and hugging each other. And the mom is saying, we're going to go with you and move you out of your hotel room. You're going to move into our home while you're here in town. And I mean, it was the two lawyers and I sat there and just watched this happen with our jaws on the ground, because it was that transformative a process that when they walked in, arms folded, hating each other, this one's just out for our money and all of that, they ended up being this united family that they had never ever been before. And it was like a missing piece to a puzzle that just fit perfectly. And watching the emotion they went through and the joy of adding a member to their family and finding a family that they'd never known before. It's just amazing when we create the space and that happens on its own, because I didn't do anything but that. I created the space. They found their way to that place by themselves. And I was truly lucky enough just to sit there and witness it.
Joy.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It makes for a long life and a happy life as a mediator. Jay Berman, thank you so much for sharing all these stories. Thank you so much for supporting this. And I hope we're going to have another talk sometime along the journey that I just opened with this series. And one place where you can find Jay is mediationtools.com. Did I say it correctly? So mediationtools.com. On the website, and you can Google Jay Berman. He's amazing. I highly recommend knowing his work. Thank you very much.
Carina, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for such a fun interview and conversation. And I'd be happy to come back anytime.
My pleasure. I will get even better at this next time.
That'll make two of us.
Yes.